that in 2013, there were approximately 407 surveys returned that we sent out. We give them out. You know that I report them quarterly. We moved our third quarter crime strategy meeting, didn't occur, if you'll recall, back in October. So, because we were doing this every quarter, but we think perhaps if we do this once every 6 months in January and July, we can get the same thing out to the community, and we'll have a little more thorough numbers, 6-month numbers instead of 90-day trends. So these are the full year statistics where we handed out the surveys, and 407 of them were returned. We use it as a barometer. It doesn't mean that this is the way it is every time, and we recognize that, but we use it as a barometer to determine whether the police department response was timely, what is the opinion of the people who actually received the service about our request, or was our request or problem handled effectively, were they treated with courtesy and respect by the officer, and their opinion of the service level of the TPD. And 84.93% really has 53.77% very satisfied, and 31.16 satisfied adds up to the 84, and that's how we get to that number. We use that as a barometer to measure, because it's sometimes easy for people who have a complaint to voice that complaint and then think that, well, that's the way the TPD is, or that's the way those men and women operate. When the reality is, this is a much clearer picture of what's really happening out there with the people who actually receive our service, because that's the only place the surveys are sent, is to those folks. So we made 137,531 calls for service. The next slide, I think, is going to show you that, a slide or two down, we're going to show that we arrested 5,560 people, which is actually a little fewer than last year. Part of that is because we divert people away from jail with mental illness issues, so those numbers go down. And of those calls for service, we actually had 22 complaints on officer conduct. Now, 22 complaints is perhaps 22 that we shouldn't have, but the reality is, out of 137,000 calls for service and 5,500 people placed under arrest, we only had 22 complaints against those officers. 10 of those for improper conduct, 6 for alleged excessive force, 1 for a procedural violation, and then 5 in the classification of other. So those are the complaint breakdown. We don't make you ask for those. We put those out, we put that information out. There are obviously personnel matters, so we put the aggregate data out instead of the specific cases, which are obviously personnel matter under Kansas law, but we say what those are, and we keep those statistics and declare them to the public. All right, arrests, 5,560, 137,000 calls for service. The vast majority of all the calls made by the Topeka Police Department do not result in the arrest of anybody. The vast majority of these calls do not result in arrest. Of these 5,560 arrests, we had 210 defensive actions. If I remember that, 210 defensive actions. Of those defensive actions, 171 of those, 210, I'm not sure, to tell you the truth, whether 210, I think it's 171, if I remember right. Where'd Anderson? He went back to work. But at any rate, the point would be that I think the accurate number was at 171. 70% of those involved only empty-hand control. Force does not get used 97% of the time when we arrest folks. 3% taser usage, 21% OC spray, 2% firearms discharges, 3% canine contact apprehension, and we classify the bite or the apprehension by a certified canine as a use of force on the subject who is arrested. So we're classifying that, and 1% baton use. The vast majority of the complaints that you see the breakdown on were improper conduct. A few of them were alleged excessive force, but the vast majority of arrests don't result in force. The vast majority of calls for service don't result in force and don't result in arrest. The facts are the facts. may be interesting to draw attention to police conduct, but the everyday, day in, day out activity of the police officers is not what is captured by certain high profile incidents. All right, this particular chart and statistic I think is very interesting. This is where we're trying to go as a community. In 2002, which is really the last year that we have accurate records on, based on classifications and Kansas law and a number of things. We can take it back further than 2002, but the data becomes inaccurate, questionable, a number of things. But as we take this back from 2013 to 2002, and you go to the far right side of the chart, the blue are violent crimes, and the darker color are property crimes. Clearly, property crime is the problem in Topeka. It's not really violent crime in a city of 128,000 people and 60 square miles and a lot of different diversities and socioeconomic status and crime areas. But if you add the two, the blue and the red together, you come up with the total crime for this area. And if you look at the reported crime in 2013, it is the lowest reported crime since we can accurately secure the data back to 2002. Now, we don't live or die on these numbers. They are only a barometer. Sometimes they go up, sometimes they go down. But if you look at these crimes and add these up to get to 10,900 and some, 11,000 some, and you get over there, you look at that number, clearly Topeka has been a safer community each of these years, except a couple where it went up. In 2009 it went down. 2008 we had the lowest reported violent crime. 2009 was down. 2010 it went up a little. 2011 was about the same. But 2012 and 2013 have clearly shown crime reductions, and that is reported crime by the citizens. We all know that actual crime is much higher than reported crime. There's a lot of crime doesn't get reported. But we use it as a barometer of what the citizens tell us are crimes reported in our community. So that, I think, is a statistic that gives us cause to celebrate as a community. It also is a testimony to the commitment of the neighborhood groups, the neighborhood watch groups. It's a commitment of the city council, making a commitment to the police department that public safety is their #1 priority, have established that public safety is their #1 priority, have given us the resources necessary to do what needs to be done, authorize full staffing of the police department, the acquisition of equipment, cars, and vehicles, and then our job then is to show them and the community that we apply these resources in a way that is efficient, effective, and one measure, just one measure of that, is reported crime reduction. So with that in mind, I say that we as a community are going in the right direction. As a community, involving all of us, we've got this headed in the right direction, but we still have too much work to do because crime is still too high. This is the property crime. For that period of time, we separated out the violent crime from the property crime. Again, it's the same chart. It's been on it with a couple of 2, 3, 4 perhaps opportunities in there for it to jump back up on us. There's been a steady decline in that crime rate. The violent crime is not so clear cut. As you can see by the chart, it's down from where it was in 2002, but it does not show a steady decline in the crime. In fact, if you look between the 600 and the 700 category, it's been along right in there for a long time. So we clearly have more work to do with regard to property crime and violent crime, but 2013 was much less violent crime than either 2012, 2011, 2010, 2009. We're headed the right direction. Okay, so to give you those statistics, and I know that there's a lot of numbers coming out here. That's why if you want copies of the slides, we're happy to give them to you. and we sent them to the council so they could have them and the city manager so they could digest the numbers. Crime 2012 to 2013, took it back all the way to 2010. So you can see where that's been in that period of time. Violent crime. Homicides, 13, down 4 from last year. And I'll pause and point out that we had a terrible quadruple homicide at the end of 2013 that accounted for the deaths of 4 people. That case is still under investigation. You may ask how that's coming along. I'll tell you that without you having to ask. The investigation is continuing. We do not have a suspect in custody. We are still working that investigation, and we have followed a lot of leads, and they have some good leads on that case, but we do not have that solved. Had we not had those 4 homicides, the number would have been considerably lower than that. It would have been 7. 7 would have been roughly half of the year before. Compared to the other years, that's more the direction where we need to be going.